They barely looked at him when he walked through the doors. For nearly 10 years, Marcus Bennett had made deliveries all over downtown Phoenix. He knew the streets better than most knew which alley to use behind a medical plaza, which receptionist preferred the box left by the back counter. It wasn't a flashy job, but it was honest work. And Marcus took pride in doing it right, every package scanned, every drop-off done with care. At most places, he was just a guy in the brown uniform. Another set of hands, another face that disappeared as quickly as it came. But there was something different about the way they treated him at Whitmore and Klein, the high-end marketing firm with its glass walls and marble floors. It wasn't just that they ignored him, it was the way they did it. Like he wasn't just beneath their notice, but beneath them. The receptionist barely glanced up when she signed for the package. She didn't say a word, just moved on, as if Marcus hadn't been there at all. That didn't surprise him. What did start to bother him over time were the chuckles, the whispers, the way a few employees grinned when he passed like they were in on some joke he wasn't meant to hear. One afternoon, he finally caught it loud and clear. "Can you imagine if the delivery guy was our boss?" one of the senior executives said, followed by a burst of laughter. Marcus didn't turn around, but his jaw tightened. Then came another voice, this time a woman's please. "He probably knows how to lift boxes, not run a meeting." More laughter. He handed over the tablet for a signature, kept his face neutral, and walked toward the exit. But something was different. This time the comments didn't just sting, they stayed. They followed him past the rows of modern offices, past the polished coffee machines and the glass walls that never seemed to reflect him at all. He caught his reflection in the front door uniform, creased from work hands, rough from lifting a scanner clipped to his belt. That was all they saw, a delivery guy, nothing more. But as he stepped out into the glare of the Arizona sun, Marcus gripped the steering wheel of his van and sat still for a long moment. He wasn't angry, not exactly. What he felt was deeper, like something sharp inside finally refusing to stay quiet. They thought they knew who he was. They had no idea. That night, Marcus sat in his van longer than usual. The engine had gone quiet, but he hadn't moved. The familiar hum of the city, the faint flicker of a street lamp outside his apartment in Mesa, it all faded behind the weight of what had happened earlier that day. He stared out the windshield, one hand resting on the steering wheel, the other rubbing slowly at his temple. He had told himself for years that it didn't matter, that people's opinions couldn't hurt him if he did his job well and held his head high. He'd faced worse shrugs, eye rolls, being talked down to, or worse, completely ignored. But this time it was different. It wasn't just about disrespect, it was about certainty. Those people at Whitmore and Klein didn't just look down on him, they believed he could never be more than what they saw in front of them. That hit somewhere deep. He finally grabbed his phone thumb, hovering for a moment, before he tapped a number he knew by heart. "Yo, you good?" his brother's voice answered after 2 rings. "I'm good," Marcus replied, though his voice said otherwise. "Just had one of those days." Malcolm chuckled on the other end, low and knowing. "Let me guess. Some rich folks made you feel like you ain't supposed to be in their space." Marcus sighed, leaning back in his seat. "Something like that." "Been there?" Malcolm said, not unkindly. He let the silence stretch, giving Marcus the space to say more. "They laughed," Marcus finally said. "Like really laughed. At the idea of me ever being anything more than a guy who drops off boxes." Malcolm didn't answer right away. "That got to you?" he asked softly. "Yeah," Marcus admitted, voice rough. Another pause. "Good," Malcolm said. That caught Marcus off guard. "Good. Means you're finally tired of it," Malcolm replied. "Tired of letting people decide who you are." Marcus was quiet. He looked down at his hands, the same ones that had gripped thousands of packages, shaken hundreds of indifferent hands. He thought back to how he used to flip sneakers as a teenager, buying and selling limited editions before most folks even knew there was a market for them. How he'd moved on to flipping used cars, then stocks, and eventually into small-time real estate. He never flaunted it, barely spoke of it to anyone, not even Malcolm. But he'd been building learning. Quietly, Steadily. Remember what Dad used to say, Malcolm asked. Marcus smiled faintly. When people only see you one way, you got two choices, prove 'em right or prove 'em wrong. Exactly. Marcus exhaled slowly, letting the words settle in. So Malcolm said a little lighter now. What are you going to do? Marcus didn't answer. Not yet. But something was shifting inside. Not a flash of anger, but resolve. That kind of heavy grounding determination that didn't roar but settled. The kind that whispered, it's time. He thought about Whitmore and Klein, the sleek offices, the polished smiles, the coffee that cost more than his dinner. They laughed at him because they thought they were untouchable, because they believed power came with a title and a tailored suit. They were wrong. All they saw was a delivery uniform, but they didn't see the late nights Marcus spent studying market trends. They didn't see the spreadsheets, the business plans, the Zoom calls after long shifts. They didn't know that behind every drop-off he'd been watching, learning how that company ran, where it stumbled, where it bled. He had already helped turn around two small businesses on the side quietly, efficiently. Nobody at Whitmore and Klein would have guessed that the man they barely noticed was the same man analyzing their client retention rates in financial weak spots. That laughter in the office, it didn't just humiliate him, it lit a fuse. Back inside his apartment, Marcus pulled out a thick manila folder he'd tucked away in a drawer months ago. It was filled with notes, projections, strategies, a proposal he had nearly given up on. But now it felt different in his hands. Solid. Ready. He picked up a pen, then paused. You're smarter than them, Malcolm had said. You've always been smarter than them. Marcus let that truth sink in. That night, while most of Phoenix slept, he stayed up sketching out a plan. Not out of spite, not out of ego, but because he was finally ready to stop thinking small. He was done letting the world tell him where his story ended. There were people out there who believed in him, investors who weren't interested in his job title or his clothes, but in what he knew and what he could do. He had been holding back, waiting for a sign, and now he had it. By sunrise, Marcus wasn't just the man who made deliveries anymore. He was a man with a mission. And before long, the same people who mocked him would have to learn a new name for him. Boss. Marcus Bennett had always been good with numbers. Even as a kid growing up in South Phoenix, he had a mind for seeing patterns where others saw chaos. While the other boys were out blowing their allowance on the newest games or shoes, Marcus was studying the market. He knew which sneakers would spike in value before they even hit the shelves. He'd wait in line, buy low, and flip high, sometimes tripling his money in a weekend. By the time he turned 20, it wasn't just shoes anymore. It was used cars, stocks, small investments. He never talked about it. That wasn't his way. By day, he wore a delivery uniform. But at night, under dim kitchen lights in his one-bedroom apartment, he read business journals, ran profit-loss scenarios, and kept track of the kind of trends that made companies rise or fall. He learned how to read people the way he read markets, quietly, patiently, methodically. So when the time came to do something big, he was ready. For months, Marcus had been working on a business proposal. Not some vague dream, but a structured, data-backed plan. He had already pitched it to a few serious investors, men who didn't care about his resume, only about results. And he had them listening, people with real money, people who respected numbers more than appearances. One of them was Anthony Wells, a quiet but powerful real estate developer known for his sharp eye and even sharper tongue. They met in the back lounge of a downtown hotel tucked into a corner where deals were whispered and contracts were signed over bourbon and espresso. Marcus showed up in his best, not to impress, but to stand his ground. Wells didn't waste time. He took a slow sip of his drink and said, "So tell me again, why Whitmore and Klein?" Marcus leaned forward, calm and clear. "Because they're in trouble, and they don't even see it coming." Wells raised an eyebrow. "Go on." Marcus pulled out a folder and laid it on the table. They've been losing clients for over a year. Their overhead is out of control. Their leadership is stuck in the past. They're spending like they're booming, but their books say otherwise. He flipped through the papers, balance sheets, client reports, projections. I give it 6 months, he said, tapping the numbers before they're either forced to downsize or get bought out. Wells sat back studying him. And you want to be the one to buy them? Marcus didn't hesitate. I don't just want to buy them, I want to turn them around. Clean house, bring in new talent, make them profitable again. There was a long pause. Then Wells let out a small chuckle. You've got guts. I'll give you that. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a check. And now you've got my backing. Don't make me regret it. Marcus stared at the amount, exactly what he needed to start the acquisition process. He took it with a steady hand. No rush, no show. Because this wasn't luck. It was time. The weeks that followed were a blur of meetings, paperwork, and long nights. Whitmore and Klein wasn't a public company, which made things trickier, but it had enough private investors and former partners that Marcus could start chipping away at the ownership. Most of them had invested years ago when the firm was hot slick, branding fat contracts, rising prestige. But those days were gone, and now those same investors were looking for a quiet way out before the ship went down. Marcus gave them one. He approached each of them one by one, calm, confident, prepared. At first, they were skeptical. A delivery guy. But the moment he started talking numbers, their tone changed. He wasn't asking for a favor. He was making an offer, one they couldn't refuse. Bit by bit, he bought up the shares. It wasn't flashy. It wasn't fast. But by the time the ink dried, Marcus Bennett held controlling interest in Whitmore and Klein. He had done it. But it wasn't time to celebrate. Not yet. The final step was making it official. That meant facing the man who ran the firm, Richard Langford, a legacy CEO who had inherited more than he had earned. Langford was old money, old habits, old thinking. And Marcus was about to end his reign. He didn't send flowers. He didn't set up a meeting through an assistant. He sent one direct email. Meeting requested, immediate. When Langford's assistant, Ellen, saw the name in her inbox, she blinked. She'd seen Marcus for years, dropping off packages, quiet and steady. She didn't know what to make of it, sir. She said, stepping into Langford's office. He didn't look up from his screen. What is it? I just got a meeting request from Marcus Bennett. Langford chuckled dryly. The delivery guy, Ellen hesitated. Yes, but he asked to speak to you directly. Langford rolled his eyes. Fine, let's get this over with. But by the time Marcus walked through those doors the next morning, something in the air had shifted. A buzz was moving through the building. Curious glances followed him as he passed the front desk. No scanner, no uniform, just a man with purpose. Langford didn't even stand. What's this about? He said, not bothering to hide his irritation. Marcus sat across from him and calmly set a thick envelope on the desk. It's about the fact that as of this morning, I own the majority of Whitmore and Klein. Langford blinked, then laughed. You take a look, Marcus said, nodding at the paperwork. Langford flipped through it slowly at first, then faster. His face changed. The color drained from his cheeks. This is a joke, he muttered. Who do you think you are? Marcus leaned back, steady as ever. I think I'm your new boss. Langford's mouth opened, but nothing came out. He looked again, hoping for a mistake. There was none. Marcus stood. You've got until the end of the day to clear out your office. He paused at the door, and Richard Langford looked up stunned. I'm sure there's a delivery job out there with your name on it. With that, Marcus walked out not just through the office, but into a life no one there ever imagined he'd claim. But it was his, and he'd earned every step. Marcus Bennett didn't walk back into Whitmore and Klein the way he used to. There was no delivery bag slung over his shoulder, no scanner clipped to his belt, just a folder in his hand and quiet purpose in his stride. He had learned over the years how to move through that office without drawing attention. But not today. Today they noticed. It started at the front desk. The receptionist, the same young woman who once barely glanced up at him, straightened her posture as soon as she saw him. Her eyes flickered from his clean blazer to the folder in his hand, unsure of what to say. She didn't need to say anything. Marcus gave her a polite nod and walked past like he belonged because now he did. Whispers followed him down the hallway. A few employees peeked up from behind their sleek desks, exchanging glances. Some tilted their heads in quiet confusion. They had seen this man before dozens of times, but this wasn't the man they remembered. He looked the same and completely different. Langford, still sitting in his office behind the glass wall, looked up as Marcus entered. His face was tight lips pressed into a line. The color hadn't returned to his cheeks since yesterday's meeting. "I assume you're here to gloat," he said, not looking away from his monitor. "I'm here to make things official," Marcus replied calmly. Langford stood still, clinging to a scrap of dignity. "This firm isn't for sale," it was Marcus said, setting the legal paperwork on the desk. "You just didn't know it." Langford opened the folder again, eyes scanning desperately for some loophole, some way to turn it back. But everything was clean, every signature valid, every share transferred, every I dotted and T crossed. He looked up with disbelief that bled into fear. You're serious. I have never been more." Marcus turned to leave, pausing just before the door. "You've got until the end of the day to clear out. Don't worry, I'm sure there's a delivery job out there for you somewhere." Langford didn't respond. Couldn't. And just like that, the king had fallen. But Marcus knew something important. Buying a company was one thing, leading it, owning the room was another. He stepped into the main office floor, where the buzz of whispers had grown louder. Eyes followed him, now filled with questions no one dared to ask out loud. People who hadn't spoken a word to him in years were suddenly interested, suddenly aware that they'd misjudged the man who used to bring in their morning mail. He approached Langford's longtime assistant, Ellen. Her expression was careful, unreadable. "I need everyone in the main conference room," Marcus said quietly. 10 minutes. Ellen didn't move right away. She'd served under Langford for over 20 years. She had seen egos come and go, promises made and broken. But she also wasn't blind. She nodded once. "I'll send the email now." By the time the staff gathered in the glass-walled conference room, the air had changed. Some employees shuffled in with uncertainty. Others leaned against the walls, arms crossed. A few cracked, nervous jokes under their breath, mostly to cover the tension settling across the room. Ryan Caldwell, one of the senior executives, was front and center, arms folded, a smirk on his lips. "What is this, a security briefing?" he muttered to the guy beside him. His friend chuckled. "Maybe they're laying off the janitors." The laughter stopped the moment Marcus stepped to the front of the room. No uniform, no package in hand, just calm, steady presence. "I'm sure you're all wondering why I called this meeting." Marcus began, his voice low, but clear. Some employees shifted uncomfortably. A few nodded slowly, waiting. "As of this morning," he continued, "I am the new majority owner of Whitmore and Klein." A wave of silence moved through the room like a slow breath being held. A few eyes darted toward each other. One person laughed softly, nervously, waiting for a punchline. "It never came," Ryan scoffed. "You're joking, right?" Marcus looked directly at him. "Do I look like I'm joking?" He placed the documents on the table, contracts, financial statements, every signature needed to make it real. "If anyone has doubts," he said, gesturing to the stack, "you're welcome to take a look." No one moved, because in that moment they all understood. The man they had overlooked, mocked, even laughed at, he was now in charge. Marcus let the silence stretch a little longer, then spoke again, his tone steady. "I've worked in this building for years. Most of you never saw me. Some of you saw me and made sure I knew exactly what you thought of me." His eyes briefly found Ryan's. "I remember every joke, every insult, every assumption that I didn't belong here. But I also remember watching this company make mistake after mistake, wasting potential, ignoring the warning signs. I remember thinking if I ever got the chance, I'd do it differently." He stepped forward, letting each word land with quiet certainty. "That chance is now." A few people straightened, some looked nervous. Others, especially those lower on the totem pole, seemed oddly hopeful. Marcus nodded slowly. Things are about to change. Some of you won't like it. And frankly, some of you won't be here to see it. Another long pause. But if you're willing to work, if you're here to be part of something better, you'll have a place. He let his eyes sweep the room one last time. This isn't the same company it was yesterday. And I'm not the same man who used to walk through these halls with a delivery bag. Then with a calm finality, he added, if that's a problem for you, there's the door. No one moved. No one spoke. Because what Marcus had said wasn't a threat. It was the truth. And whether they were ready or not, the room had just shifted. Marcus Bennett was no longer someone they could overlook. From now on, he wasn't passing through. He was leading. The silence in the conference room stretched thick and uneasy. Marcus could feel it hanging in the air. The disbelief, the anxiety, the dawning realization that things were changing. For some, the truth was starting to sink in. For others, denial still clung like a shadow. Then right on cue, Ryan Caldwell broke the silence. This is insane, he said, forcing out a bitter laugh. You can't be serious. Marcus turned toward him, calm and unflinching. You think I'd stand here and say all this if I wasn't? Ryan took a step forward, arms still crossed, trying to hold on to the bravado that had always gotten him by. So what now? You come in here, make a speech, throw your weight around, and we're all supposed to just fall in line. Marcus didn't blink. No, you're supposed to do your job. If you can't do that, you're free to leave. Ryan scoffed, and you're suddenly the expert on how to run this place. I know more than you think, Marcus replied, voice steady. I've spent years watching how things work around here, watching the arrogance, the waste, watching leaders coast while the company crumbled beneath them. And I've spent even more time learning how to build something that lasts. The tension in the room thickened. A few employees glanced at each other. Some looked uncomfortable, others quietly intrigued. Marcus reached for a folder from the stack he'd brought and flipped it open. Actually, he said, let's talk about what you've been doing, Ryan. Ryan's jaw tightened. Marcus continued. Your department lost one of the firm's biggest clients last quarter. Overpromised, underdelivered, refused to adjust the strategy even when the market clearly shifted. That account walked and took millions in revenue with it. He tapped to the report with the finger, and I have the documents to back it up. Ryan's face turned red. That's not the whole story, I know, Marcus said smoothly, but it's the part you never wanted anyone to see. He shut the folder with a quiet finality. So if we're questioning who deserves to be here, you might want to start with yourself. Ryan opened his mouth, but no words came. Just a tight breath and a clenched jaw. Marcus turned back to the rest of the room. He knew what they were thinking. Some were worried about their jobs. Others were wondering if they were next. So he spoke plainly. This is the part where some of you start to panic, he said. Start wondering what's coming. And I won't sugarcoat it, some of you will lose your jobs. That got their attention. I've already done my homework, Marcus continued. I know who's pulling their weight. I know who's been skating by. And I know who's been taking credit for work they didn't do. Some folks in the room stiffened. A few exchanged guilty glances. The old way of doing business had just met its reckoning. There's dead weight in this company, Marcus said. And I don't carry dead weight. He gave them a moment. Let it settle in. But if you're here to work, if you're here to build something better, you've got nothing to worry about. This company has potential. I've seen it, and I intend to bring it back. He paused, then added, but if you're only here for the paycheck, if you think your title protects you, if you think nothing ever changes, then maybe you should follow Ryan's lead. Ryan, still fuming, adjusted his tie. Fine, he snapped. If this is how it's going to be, then I quit. Marcus nodded. That's the first smart decision I've seen you make in years. Ryan muttered something under his breath, then turned on his heel and stormed out of the conference room, slamming the glass door behind him. The silence that followed was heavy but different now. Less disbelief, more clarity, Marcus looked around the room again, meeting the eyes of the people still standing there. For those of you still here, he said gently, remember this. Whitmore and Klein isn't going to survive by clinging to the past. It's going to grow. It's going to get better, but only if the right people are in place. His voice softened just a touch. If you're willing to step up, to do the real work, you'll have a place here, a voice, a future. He let that truth sit for a moment before finishing. But if you're only here because it's comfortable, because you think your seat at the table is permanent, you might want to find the door before it finds you. This time when he looked around the room wasn't filled with fear. It was filled with choice. And Marcus had made his. The rest would have to decide for themselves. The atmosphere inside Whitmore and Klein had shifted. As Marcus stepped out of the conference room, the hallway buzzed with quiet energy. Some employees sat frozen at their desks, staring blankly at their screens. Others whispered in hushed tones, glancing toward the door Ryan had just stormed out of. The man they'd laughed at for years had taken control, and not with noise or showmanship, but with calm authority and undeniable facts. Some were scared, some were angry, but a few, just a few, looked inspired. Marcus didn't dwell on the reactions. He'd said what needed to be said. Now came the part that mattered most, building something new. Not just a company with better numbers, but a workplace with better people, stronger purpose, and a sense of dignity that couldn't be faked. He walked down the corridor that used to feel like a maze of glass walls and cold stairs. Now it felt different. Not exactly welcoming, but no longer hostile. There was room at last for possibility. At the end of the hall, he opened the door to what was now his office, Langford's old domain. It was larger than he expected. Leather chairs, a heavy oak desk, shelves lined with business books that looked brand new, never read. Everything about it screamed appearance, not substance. He let out a quiet breath as he stepped inside. The view stretched across downtown Phoenix. It should have felt triumphant. But Marcus wasn't looking for victory. He was looking for something real. He walked to the window, letting the light spill across his face. So much of his life had been lived in the margins, working late, listening more than speaking, being underestimated again and again. He thought taking this seat would feel like a finish line. It didn't. It felt like the starting gate. A quiet knock came at the door. He turned. It was Ellen Langford's former assistant. She stepped in carefully, a folder in her hands and a look on her face that Marcus couldn't quite read. Everything all right, she asked. He nodded, just getting used to the view. Ellen offered a faint smile. I imagine it looks different from this vibe. Marcus looked at her for a moment, really looked. She had been here through it all. 20 years. She'd seen more than most said, less than many, and stayed long after she probably should have left. But she was still here. I've got a question for you, he said. Shoot, she replied, folding her arms gently. Why'd you stay? He asked. Through all the decline, the silence, Langford's leadership, Ellen didn't answer right away. She looked down, then out the window. Because I love what this place used to be, she said quietly. And part of me still believes it could be that again. Marcus nodded slowly. He could hear the weight in her voice, not just memory, but hope. And hope was hard to come by in places like this. I didn't expect this, she added. I've seen a lot of CEOs come and go, but I never thought I'd see someone like you end up in this chair. Marcus chuckled softly. Neither did they. Ellen gave a half smile. They underestimated the wrong man. She turned to go, then paused. There's a lot of uncertainty right now, Marcus. A lot of people don't know where they stand. There always is, he said gently, but we'll figure it out together. Ellen nodded. All right then, she said, her voice steadier. Let's get to work. When she closed the door behind her, Marcus turned back to the window. His reflection caught in the glass just like it had that day at the lobby door. Same man, different posture, a little older, a little more sure. He'd come a long way, but more importantly, he hadn't come alone. There were people in that building who, like him, had been overlooked. People with real talent, quiet ideas, and nowhere to go under the old regime. They hadn't had a voice, but now they had a chance. And Marcus was going to make sure they had a place. This was never about revenge. Not really. If it had been, the satisfaction would have already faded. Ryan's exit, Langford's stunned silence. Those were just chapters. What mattered now was what came next. Respect Marcus had learned wasn't handed out. It was earned. And not with a title, but with action. He would lead. Not from above, but from within. Not for show, but for substance. Because in the end, leadership wasn't about who shouted the loudest. It was about who showed up. And Marcus Bennett was here to stay. Marcus Bennett stood at the window of his new office watching the last rays of the Arizona sun stretch across the skyline. Phoenix always looked different in the late afternoon, softer somehow, like the city itself was winding down after a long day. He rested one hand on the edge of the desk, Langford's old desk, and let the quiet settle. It had been a long road, from a man ignored in hallways to the one people now turned to for answers. From pushing carts through the back entrance to owning the building that once made him feel small. But the power wasn't what moved him. It was the purpose. This wasn't about proving anyone wrong anymore. That satisfaction had come and gone like a breeze. What stayed was something deeper, a sense of duty to build something better than what had come before. There were still people in the office sorting through the changes, uncertain, cautious, hopeful. And Marcus would meet them where they were, not with speeches, but with listening, with patience, with vision. A quiet knock broke the stillness. Ellen stepped in holding a stack of files. She didn't speak right away, just looked at him, then at the view. "You ready?" she asked softly. Marcus turned and gave a small nod. "Yeah," he said. "I think I am." She smiled, handed him the folders, and turned to leave. As the door closed behind her, Marcus looked once more out over the city, and for the first time in his life, he felt seen. We all know what it's like to be underestimated, to be overlooked, dismissed, or judged by the surface of things. Marcus's story is about more than business or success. It's about dignity, about the quiet strength it takes to hold on to who you are, even when the world tells you that you don't matter. It's a reminder that respect isn't something given, it's something built. And no one, not a title, not a suit, not a corner office, gets to decide your worth, but you. Sometimes the strongest people are the ones no one saw coming. If this story meant something to you, I'd truly love to hear about it. Whether it reminded you of a moment in your own life or of someone you know who kept going when it would have been easier to give up, please leave a comment and share your thoughts. And if you'd like to hear more stories like this, stories that honor real lives and quiet strength, feel free to subscribe. No pressure, just a warm invitation. Thank you for spending this time with me. It means more than you know.